Welcome everyone to MarshWatch number 3. Today is Bird ID session number 2 and wetland plants. Let's get going here. How can I change the slide? There we go. Before we get started, I'd just like to say that I'm joining you today from Saskatoon, which is located on Treaty 6 territory, which encompasses the homelands of the Cree, Dakota, Nakota, Saulteaux, and Stoney First Nations, as well as the homeland of the Métis people. If you are tuning in for the first time, my name is Leanne Latromoy, and I have the pleasure of working for a wonderful organization called Birds Canada. We're a not-for-profit, and our mission is to drive action to increase the understanding, appreciation, and conservation of birds in Canada. And as you can see by this little montage of photos here, I've been working in wetlands for some time and I love them dearly, and hopefully through this program you'll gain an appreciation for them too, but hopefully for the wider bird world around you. Okay, on the agenda for this week, we've got a few birds, we've got a few frogs, and I'm also going to talk a bit about wetland plants. You might be wondering, this isn't a plant ID course. It's not. But when you're when you're out there trying to bird watch with people, it's really helpful to point to say, hey, that cattail stand over there or that bulrush stand over there, just to help you, be able to communicate with the people that you're bird watching with a little bit better. And these are plants that I do mention, for some of the habitat preferences, so you can get a little bit better of an understanding of what I'm talking about when I say cattail or bulrush or sedges or that sort of thing. All of that will be recorded and posted online. And then once we're done that, we'll turn off the recording and then we'll get to the quizzes and discussion part. Okay, birds and frogs today. We've got one duck, the northern pintail. We've got a rail, the American coot. We've got two grebes, red-necked and pied-billed. And then we've got a few shorebirds. We're going to do the killdeer, American avocet, and black-necked stilt. And we'll throw in a frog for good measure, the northern leopard frog. All right, jumping right into the northern pintail. This has to be the classiest duck that exists. If you were to just imagine like a duck going to a ballroom, like a fancy black tie event, like whatever the northern pintail drake is wearing, it's totally suitable. And they really do, they have this elegant swan-like body proportion. They've got a rather long neck, and the way they carry themselves is just, their neck is often up a fair bit, so it really elongates it, and they're a handsome little duck. They're medium sized, so they're going to be a little bit smaller than the mallard. And one of the keys to ID to keep in mind is we're looking for a lot of the white because that reflects all of the light back at us, and at a distance or in poor light conditions, the white really still does stand out. So thankfully, the northern pintail has this really lovely white neck and white spur that goes up the back of the head that really stands out and really helps to accentuate that kind of long neck look to it. Otherwise, the drake got this kind of pale brownish face, and of course, as its name would suggest, they have a really nice long tail in the back there. So really, really handsome duck. Their bill is also kind of this, it reminds me of like almost white-walled tires. It's, got this kind of bluish with a black outline to it. Super handsome duck. The speculum patch on the drakes is kind of this iridescent greenish color with a broad white band on the bottom and a little bit of that kind of straw buffy colored streak on the top. Super, super handsome birds. The hen, she is very plain, but part of that plainness helps you to identify her. So she looks a lot like those dabbling ducks that we've covered so far, like the mallard and the northern shoveler, where they're overall kind of brown and mottled. The thing to look at here is going to be the face. There is really not much going on that face. There's maybe the smallest hint every once in a while of a bit of a line, but really it's a very, very plain face. And the key to take away is that that face, the browns in it are usually a nice warmer tone than the rest of the browns on the body. So more a little bit like on those red color tones as opposed to like a cool gray brown looking thing. The bill is nice and all dark, and she is going to have those similar lovely slender proportions as the drake, but she's not going to have that really long pointy tail, sadly. That would be really nice. It would surely help to identify her a little bit more, but in the plainness, that's what can help point you to it. So dark bill, plain face, and that brown is going to be warmer than the rest of the body. And don't worry, we're going to compare the pintail hen to the other hens that we've covered in a little bit here, but a nice, long, slender neck, really, really helpful. The speculum patch, it's kind of just a bronzy green in females, more bronzy. Sometimes they'll get a little bit iridescent green sheen, but I find you don't often see the speculum patch on these guys when they're just sitting around, loafing around on the water. So as you can see here, you can see maybe a tiny little bit of it, but it is pretty much covered. So you'll notice that in flight, but there's something else that I want you to look at when the birds are in flight, and that's their overall body shape. But first, we'll cover their diet. They're a surface feeder, making them a dabbling duck, so they are able to get around fairly easily on the water, and they can fly right from a standstill. They don't need to take a little running start to get going, to get flying. They're an omnivorous generalist. They'll eat kind of whatever comes their way, so seeds and grain, tubers, vegetative parts of aquatic plants, and they'll eat all kinds of invertebrates, especially in the breeding season. And that's really true of a lot of birds, even those things that you think like sparrows, that they're, they have seed-eating bills. Almost everything during the breeding season is going to be relying fairly heavily on insects and crustaceans and those sorts of things, because that's where all the protein is, and that's really what helps them, build more muscle mass. That's going to help the hen, put on weight and be able to lay those eggs. And then for those birds that provision their young, they're going to be finding those insects and feeding those to their young. Northern pintails, they're really a grassland duck. They like that upland grassy habitat for nesting and shallow wetland basins kind of interspersed in there. So you'll often find them out in open country. Now, the males do make kind of distinctive noise, but they're not, I find, the most chatty of ducks. So I'm going to play it for you, but don't worry about committing this one to memory so much. It's not going to help you that much in the field, but it is very cute to listen to. So they make these light little toots, and then there's another sound that they make that almost sounds like, you're moving a zipper along on a tent or something. So I'll play those sounds for you here. So those little toots and those kind of zee, 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 to me, it just reminds me of, having one of those light rain jackets as a kid and playing with the zipper. So I'll play that once more, those toots and those kind of zipper noises. Alrighty, I mentioned in flight they're kind of distinct, and if you've ever played with lawn darts before they were banned and maybe your parents held on to them or something, they really have a lawn dart shape. That long neck really stands out. So they've got this kind of roundish head, long neck, and then a bulky part of their body. And then the drakes especially have that really long pointed tail. The hens don't have a pointed tail. That's just part of what makes the boys boys and what makes them flashy and attractive to the males. The hens are trying to attract less attention overall, so they don't have those kind of long tail plumes. But imagine someone throwing a lawn dart in the sky. That's really what these ducks look like in flight. And they have rather pointy wings for a dabbling duck. A lot of dabbling ducks have slightly more rounded wings. Northern pintails, nice little pointy wings. So just if you can superimpose a lawn dart on it, it's likely to be a pintail. They're also a pretty wide-ranging species. Of course, some of their strongholds are on the northern Great Plains, where they really get a lot of that kind of grassy, open habitat interspersed with shallow vegetation. But you might see these a fair bit across most of Canada, much less so in the Shield country, especially in Quebec and Ontario. Okay, take one sip of water. Well, you feast your eyes on the hens we've covered to date. So far, the female ducks that we've looked at are the mallard, the northern shoveler, and the northern pintail. The northern shoveler has a really big spatulate bill. It really does look like somebody put a shoehorn on the end of its face. Both the mallard and the northern shoveler have kind of orangey tinged bills with varying amounts of splotchiness on the mallard and kind of an olive gray tone on the top of it for the northern shoveler. The pintail is going to have that kind of darkish bill. It's not quite black. It's kind of like a slate gray. But again, she's got that really plain face. The color tones are warmer than the rest of the body. And you can see this on the mallard hen. The head is kind of cooler in tone than the rest of the body. The rest of the body has more of these warmer brown tones. And on the face, it's just a little bit more of a gray brownish. So sometimes you can see that. But it is a key feature for the northern pintail, that kind of warm brown head on an otherwise plain body. And the females, they're all patterned like this, especially in the dabbling ducks, because as the hens are nesting, they're nesting in the upland habitat, the upland vegetation, and they really want to blend in. So if a predator is, flying above them or trotting along, they can't necessarily see them from the vegetation that's surrounding them. So this is a feature you'll see in the dabbling ducks. The diving duck hens are much darker, and that's because they want to blend in with either the background on the water that they're nesting over, or they want to blend into whatever tree cavity they're in. So those are the female hens to date. Hopefully that's making you feel a little bit more comfortable taking a look at some of your bigger dabbling duck hens. You're always going to have an easier time if you start to pick up on shape and habits from the males first, because they're the ones that are easy to identify. And I'll just show here that kind of difference between the dabbling hens and the diver hens. You really notice when you lump them all together that the dabblers have this very complex kind of mottled feathering. The feathers are pretty complex. There's a lot of pattern on them, and that really is to blend in with the upland vegetation, whereas the divers, they're going to be nesting either over water or in a cavity, and they're still wanting to blend in, but they just have to blend into a different sort of background. So they're, on the whole, much more dark and much more plain. So that can be a quick clue to figure out, are you looking at a hen that's a dabbler or a diver? Just look at the feathering pattern on the bodies. Okay, next up we have the American coot. So this is a large rail, and we talked about the sora last week as a rail, and they're kind of sneaky, and most of the time you don't see them. The coot is a rail that has thrown that playbook out the window. They act very much like a duck. They're out on the open water. They're not going around sneaking and hiding. They're really bobbing around and floating around on the water, much like a duck does. But if you take a look at their feet, you'll quickly realize that they don't have the traditional webbed feet that a duck has. They have these kind of lobes on their toes, and those little lobes, they act as little paddles so that that helps them swim, because they don't actually have the webbing between the toes like the ducks do. So both sexes look the same. They're black overall, and they have these neat little white tail feathers, and they'll use those tail feathers to signal to each other during conflicts. It's a really neat behavior, and I think I've got some slides coming up showing that. So overall, really kind of jet black. They'll have a bit of a reddish shield on their forehead. The bill extends up and makes a nice little shield plate on the top of their head, which is a really kind of dark crimson. For the most part, it looks black, but I'm sure if you got a really nice close look at one, you could probably see those red markings on it. Nice little beady red eye, but really what stands out is completely jet black bird with this bright white bill and little white tail feathers. There's not going to be anything else that looks quite like that. They are super common. You'll find them in most wetlands. And they're going to be bobbing around and going and making all kinds of kind of hiccups and burr noises and popping sounds. If it sounds like some sort of weird chicken in the marsh, you've likely got yourself an American coot, and I will play a couple of those sounds for you here. So you might not see them in the wetland, because there's a lot of wetlands that have like really tall cattails and open water interspersed in the middle of it, but you can hear those like pops and burrs and hiccup noises. I'll play them once more for you here. I'm seeing there's a question in the chat, what is the coot's shield for? And I don't know, and I'm not sure that it is known. I'll look it up and see if I can't come up with an answer, but sometimes they just have those things for maybe some signaling reason. I have no idea, and I'm not sure that it is known, but sometimes the answer is the birds are the way they are, which is terribly unsatisfying, I know, but I'll try to get an answer for that one. Okay, here's a few images of coots fighting. They are very territorial. They get into all kinds of squabbles. And most often in the natural world, like we spoke about for birdsong, you want to avoid physical confrontation, because physical confrontation is risky. Coots will sometimes get into these kicking and slapping matches where you can see these two are literally, they're on their backs and they're kicking at each other and they're trying to fight. They'll get their wings involved. It doesn't always devolve into this. Oftentimes, as you can see this kind of photo here, they'll do this posture where they'll stick their neck out, they'll kind of hunch up their feathers, and then they'll fan their tail feathers, those white little feathers on their rear end, and I feel like it's almost like waving, a peace flag. It's like, okay, okay, we're cool, yeah, we're cool, we don't need to fight anymore about this. So coots are entertaining to watch. If you have a good wetland nearby and you have some coots on it, just spend some time watching them, because their antics are kind of hilarious. They're a surface feeder. They're not going to be diving under the water very much. They peck, they dabble, and they're also omnivorous. They're going to be eating all kinds of plant matter year round, as well as invertebrates, especially during the breeding season and for feeding their young. And you can see this cute little picture down here of, a coot parent. I think that might be a little minnow that it's giving to its young. Coots are probably one of the worst parents of the bird world. A lot of species like coots, they'll lay a lot of eggs, but there's not always enough food to go around, or the parents just get ornery. So sometimes what happens with coots is that if a baby is too demanding, the parents will peck at it to death. It's not a terribly pleasant thing, but it's something that does routinely happen. So if you do see it, I don't want you to be totally shocked. It's just part of nature, and I don't know, if they're selecting for ones that whine less, but sometimes they can be awfully cruel to some of their own chicks. Coots have a great big wide distribution. I find you don't see them quite so much back east, but they're really, really common in the prairie pothole regions, where we've got all of these little wetlands all over the place. So that was our little story about coots. Hopefully you don't think they're too terrible. That's just the way nature is sometimes. Next up, we've got a couple of grebe species, and I'll just describe grebes briefly here, because I know most people don't really know what a grebe is. They're similar to a loon. They're related to the loons. They're expert divers. Their legs are set very far back on their body, so it makes them really, really super awkward on land. Like, they're barely just getting up into their nests. This isn't a species that, like, if it lands, say, in a puddle, because it thinks it's a bigger pond or something, it is going to have a hard time, because unless it has that long runway to get flying, they're not really going to be able to get going. They all have pretty pointed bills. Some of them are more chunky and wedge shaped. Some of them are a little bit slender, but they have nice points. And they look like they have no tails. They do have tail feathers. They're just terribly reduced. So you can see it really well here in the pie-billed grebe. It's got essentially, a fluffy bum, as opposed to something that looks like a more organized tail. Grebes also consume feathers. They do eat a lot of fish, and it's not totally known for sure why, but the theory is that it helps to form kind of a bolus in the stomach that traps those fish bones, and it helps them dissolve in the stomach acids for longer before moving on down the digestive tract. And they'll actually pick feathers off of their bodies and feed it to their chicks, so that their chicks learn to do the same. So it's a neat little adaptation, and they think it's to help slow down, digestion, to help dissolve the bones a little bit better. It's really cute the way they parent their young. They have them brooded on their backs, much like loons do. So you can see one parent with little kids all piled into its back, and the other parent will be busy diving and provisioning the young. Very cute. And they also pretty well all have these elaborate courtship rituals that involve highly stylized rituals and dances and things, and they're quite precious when they get going. So first up, we've got the redneck grebe. This is primarily a kind of central western species. It is a large grebe. It's not quite as large as a loon, but it's approaching that size. They're conspicuous, they're loud, and they're long-necked. Both sexes look the same, and they've got this silvery gray cheek patch. And as you guessed, that kind of silvery whitish color is something that still stands out at a far distance. Because trust me, at a distance or in any sort of poor lighting, this beautiful kind of reddish rusty neck really totally blends into that kind of drab gray black body. So that cheek patch really, really stands out, especially at a distance. They have quite a massive bill. It's got a little bit of a tinge of yellow to it, but overall it's kind of a dark-ish bill, and they have this nice dark cap to go along with it. You'll find these guys in larger wetlands for the most part with open water and emergent vegetation. You'll also find them on lakes that have, pockets of wetlands kind of on their margin. So they can do very well in open water. They are territorial, but you'll often see, especially on a larger lake, there'll be multiple pairs of them. And when they get going and calling back and forth, it's really, really neat. The other thing I didn't mention about grebe babies is that they're all essentially wearing adorable little sets of pajamas. They have these really black and white stripy colorations on them, and most of them have some sort of like reddish marking on the face that helps direct the parents, like, hey, food here, this is where the food goes. So super adorable little babies. And they make this kind of whinnying braying call that's very, very loud, and it travels a good distance, especially, like I said, if you've got a lake. You know how sound travels really well over water? That's because the sound waves, they keep bouncing off the water, they don't get absorbed. So sound travels really well over water, and that's really true for the redneck grebe. So let's listen to its kind of whinnying braying call. It's perhaps not the most majestic sounding bird call, but it really is fairly unique and travels a long way. So they kind of ree ree. So think ree red-necked grebe. Maybe that works for you. Maybe it doesn't. I'll play it once more. Okay, these guys are divers, obviously, as I mentioned before. So they'll eat everything from fish, crustaceans, aquatic insects and larvae, and amphibians. They're not going to be going after much plant material at all. And they have these elaborate courtship rituals, and they have cute little names for a lot of the grebe positions and postures. So, they have displays organized into the discovery ceremony, the weed ceremony, where they'll dive underwater and they will present clumps of wet vegetation to each other, kind of like a, hey, look, I can provide us with all of the nesting material we need. I am obviously the most suitable mate for you. And they'll do this repeatedly. Well, they'll keep, grabbing bits of whatever underwater vegetation they can, because that's how they build their nest. They're going to be making a mound, so sort of like in the middle of a wetland area. They'll build it up from the bottom. You'll find these nests just kind of out there in the, in the wetland, as you can see in these two images here, and they keep their eggs fairly wet and damp. Anyway, so their displays are very adorable. And here's just a few of their postures and things that they do. I think the name Ghostly Penguin Display is hilarious. I want to meet whoever named all of these, because they have the cat display, the bouncy posture, the penguin dance. It really is adorable, and I highly recommend, if it's not too late where you are after this webinar, that you Google any sort of grebe displays. They're all quite precious and fun to watch. As I mentioned, it's more of a kind of central and western species. So if you live outside of that region, you should come on and visit and take a look at all of the cool things we have in our wetlands over here. Okay, the next grebe is the pie-billed grebe. This one is probably the most secretive of all of the grebes. They're relatively small and compact. Their bodies are mostly kind of this just brownish, grayish color. They're often wet because they spend a lot of time under the water. They have a big kind of blocky head shape. It looks quite large for their body size. And the biggest clue to, figuring out what it is really is that pied build. And pied just means multicolored. So they've got this kind of whitish, almost with a tinge of blue in it, kind of bill and skin around the eye, with this black little circle around the mid part of the bill. So that's their pied bill. And it really does stand out at a distance, because you'll get sick of me having to say this, but those light colors really do stand out at a distance. So any of those whites and grays. And same with the pied-billed grebe, bill definitely stands out. They do have a darker chin, and sometimes you can actually see that if you get a good close-up look at them. But they are very secretive. They're the sort of grebe that sees someone like walking by, even if it's in a city park, and they're just like, no, I don't want this. So they'll go underwater, and they can stay underwater for a long time. And what they'll often do is they'll go to the complete other side of the wetland, and they do this thing that I call the submarine, where they will sometimes they'll just slowly sink under the water, and they'll be watching you. They'll be making eye contact, and they'll slowly sink, keeping you in their sights. Sometimes they'll dive quickly, depends on how spooked they are. And then oftentimes you won't be able to spot them again because, like I said, they'll go to some other part of the wetland, and then they'll slowly come up out of the water. And like this one in the bottom corner here, they're not going to be exposing very much, so it's really tough to spot them again. You have to get sometimes pretty lucky to see them out kind of doing normal behaviors, not doing this kind of submerged sneaky thing. So they're hilarious. I really like these grebes. I just think the submarine game is absolutely more adorable. And if they see you and they're coming up out of the water, and they're just gonna go like, no, this is not what I wanted. And then they'll sink under the water and they'll go over somewhere else and be a little bit more secretive. So that's the pie-billed grebe, fun little behavior quirk. You're going to find these in wetlands with emergent vegetation and open water, and enough water so that they can dive and get at their food, which it's an opportunistic diver. It's going to go after fish, crustaceans, aquatic insects and larvae, leeches, amphibians, all that kind of good stuff. And you can see that really nice dark chin patch here on this individual in particular. It's a nice angle here. And again, all of those grebes, they kind of have a really reduced amount of tail going on, and it mostly just looks like a fluffy little grebe bum. Very cute. They have two main calls that they do. The longer ow whoop call, and it's varying, variations on a theme of ow, 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 whoop, ow, whoop, and they can go on, they can drag it on for quite a while. Or they have this hyena, and that's usually, it sounds like laughing. It really does sound like a laughing hyena, and they'll often do that in pairs. So you'll get one starting it, and then the other member of the pair will also chime in with the hyena. So we'll listen to the ow whoop first, and then we'll do the hyena. And that, as you might gather, is a pretty loud call. And that one you can hear from a good distance away, half a kilometer away, you can easily hear that. I'll play the hyena now, much less regularly heard, and it doesn't travel near as far in terms of sound. I'll play that once more because it's a quick recording. And I'll do one more, I'll do part of the ow whoop. They can really draw out or speed up various portions of that. It's a little bit plastic in that way, but it's still pretty distinctive, that kind of ow whooping. Here's just a cute couple of images of some of their dances. They're a little bit less elaborate, which kind of makes sense for a more secretive grebe, but they do very cute little, synchronized movements, and they'll get up on their kind of hind end, and then they'll, bump chest, and it is just absolutely adorable. I recommend spending time and watching the wetland critters do their thing, especially early in the season when they're trying to impress mates. Pied-billed grebes have quite the range. You're going to be seeing them across all of the US and a great deal of Canada as well. Okay, on to our first shorebird of the evening. We've got the killdeer, not named because it looks like it has a target on its head when seen from head on, but it is so named because of the call that it makes, and we'll get to that in a little bit here. This is a small shorebird, and it's of the plovers. So Plovers have they almost have like a pigeon-like little head. They've got a stubby little bill and a quite rounded little head, and they're small little shorebirds that you're going to be seeing running around kind of wetland margins and edges. Killdeers, you'll actually see them a lot in agricultural fields as well. They have a much wider tolerance for habitats than a lot of shorebirds do. These guys will actually, tolerate humans quite well, much to their detriment. They will lay their eggs sometimes in gravel parking lots because, ooh, they think this is a great pebbly beach and you're keeping all kinds of predators away. Isn't this great? And then you have to flag it, and the killdeer gets upset every time someone comes out to move their vehicle. Anyway, that's some of the killdeer's little quirks. So the bird's got a short, straight little bill, kind of pigeon-like head. That is really typical of the plovers. Both sexes are going to look the same, much like a lot of the species that we've talked about so far. They're solid brown above, white below, and they have this really defined double breast band, so that those two bands that go around the neck and one that kind of just sits on the bottom as a necklace there. They also have a black band that goes across their forehead and one that goes across the base of the bill. And I always imagine it, if you were to look at this bird head on, like you're almost doing for this one that's sitting on a nest, it almost looks like a target. So that's how I kind of remember it, target, kill, and then it also works in with their song as well. So as I mentioned, they're common throughout agricultural fields, mudflats, lawns, gravel parking lots, and they're fairly tolerant of human disturbance. Their diet, they're a chase and probing species. They'll also do a little bit of foot tapping, and they'll tap their little feet on some, wet, moist soil to try to entice insects to come out and check out what all this tapping is about. They'll eat a lot of terrestrial invertebrates, so earthworms, insect larvae, grasshoppers and beetles especially. They'll eat snails. Of course, they'll eat seeds and aquatic invertebrates as well. And they'll often do this broken wing display. So, as I mentioned, they are tolerant of humans, but they definitely don't want you to eat their babies or step on their eggs. So, what they'll do when they sense danger, whether that be to their chicks or their nest, they're going to feign injury. They're going to pretend that they have a broken wing, they're going to fan out their tail, and they're going to expose this really kind of chestnutty, reddish rump patch, and they're really going to act like they're injured, and they'll keep leading you away. They'll let you get a little bit close, and then they'll scurry away, and then, oh, I'm so injured, so that it leads a predator away from their nest, because maybe a predator caught scent of the nest or caught scent of young or something, but then it sees like, oh, well, this is a bigger prize. This is like an injured bird here. I'm sure I can catch that injured bird. And they keep, doing that display further and further on to lead, whatever predator, perceived or real, away. So they're one of the best examples that you can see, like kind of on a regular basis, of a distraction display. Lots of other bird species will do it, but the killdeer really puts in the whole work. So it really, really pretends to be injured. And shorebird young, if you've never had the chance to see shorebird babies, they're born fluffy, like little cotton balls on toothpick legs. They're absolutely adorable, and they're pretty much born ready to run around and go help feed themselves once they've dried off. Very, very cute. As I mentioned, the killdeer says its name in its call, and their Latin name is Charadrius vociferus. Vociferus means, quite vocal, and killdeers are absolutely vocal. They will let you know that they're in the neighborhood and that you're in their territory. So here's the killdeer call. So they really do say their name, killdeer, 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 killdeer. And again, this is another one with quite a wide range in North America. So almost wherever you are, you're probably likely to run into a killdeer. Okay. One of the classic beautiful shorebirds of the northern Great Plains is the American avocet. It's a fairly large bird, so it's going to be quite a bit larger than the killdeer. They have these incredibly long, kind of baby blue, powdery blue legs. So they're quite tall. They're often wading, so you don't always see the extent of their legs until they get out into shallower waters or the marsh edges. And what really stands out is their really, really fine, upturned bill. It's more curved and slender in the females, and it's slightly longer and straighter in the males. They're really, really quite gorgeous. They have this rusty salmon wash to their heads. Otherwise, they're kind of this black and white bird, and they've got all this black and white markings on their wings on mostly a white body. But that kind of salmon rusty wash over the head is, you know, it's just so beautiful. It's so iconic of the prairies. You'll find these guys wherever there's kind of shallow ephemeral wetlands, saline wetlands, or the shallows of larger wetlands. And sometimes, depending on the lake, how the lake system is, there might be some shallower wetland areas, and you can find them on those sorts of lakes as well. And they use those long kind of upturned bills to swish and pick at stuff in the water. So they're after invertebrates, that's insects, larvae, crustaceans. They'll eat aquatic plant seeds, and they'll also consume small fish. And here's a photo of their very cute little one. You can see they've already got that nice long bill starting. It's got a lot of growing left to do, but their shorebird babies are just the cutest. In flight, they're really showy. They're mostly black wings, but there's kind of these black and white portions to the upper back and sort of like the edge parts of the wings. So they are quite showy. And again, that just really long, slender bill, salmon wash to the head on an otherwise black and white body. Really, really iconic of the American avocet. They do make a call. They can be vocal, but don't focus too much on the call. You'll more often see them than you will hear them. But we can play the call for interest's sake. They do the kind of like a pleek, pleek, pleek call. This is the kind of call that you'll hear something, and so it makes you turn your head, and then you see it, and that's mostly how you'll wind up identifying it. So you can use that sound more as just to like get your attention over there as opposed to something that you're like really committing to memory. I mean, go ahead if you want to, but definitely focus on the visual ID for these. They're a species that has more of a, Central American, like I said, Central North American distribution. So you'll find them on the northern Great Plains fairly regularly. And this is reminding me to mention that all of these range maps, especially like anyone that you find in a book, any range map anywhere, just take it with, a grain of salt, because birds are not following, set out lines on a map. That's just where people have, drawn lines of most observations, and they're not always the most up to date. Bird ranges do expand, contract, and shift, and none of the ones I could find for American avocet included all of the kind of parkland area and the moist mixed grassland of Saskatchewan and Manitoba. So I went in and added that just so you think that so you can see closer to what the true distribution is of the American avocet. Okay, last but not least for our birds, the absolutely stunning and relatively new to Canada black-necked stilt. This is a medium shorebird, but it's got incredibly slender proportions. It's got that long, very straight needle-like bill. It has a long neck, and the thing that really stands out are these bubblegum pink long legs. They're incredibly long, and it almost seems surreal that there could be a little dainty shorebird walking around on such slender little legs. Both sexes look the same. Um, for the most part, they're going to be black above. It can be slightly brown tinged in the females, but for the most part, they look similar overall. They have white below, so on the neck and undersides, black above, and this little cute little white eyebrow. The shape is really what's gonna, help to solidify that this is a black-necked stilt. Those impossibly long legs, that really long, slender bill, and again, that black and white coloration is just very contrasting, and it is fairly unique. You'll find them increasingly in shallow ephemeral wetlands, saline wetlands, and shallows of larger wetlands. They like more vegetation in their wetland than American avocets typically do. You can find them in an area with both species, but they'll typically be in areas with more vegetation. They kind of prefer that more for nesting. They like to have a little bit more cover. They're another picker, so they're going to be out there poking around and getting invertebrates. That's going to be insect larvae and crustaceans, small fish, and they can even eat little teeny tiny frogs. And it is amazing that they can even like sit down on their legs being so long. And here's a cute little image of an adult brooding the chicks. You can see the chicks are kind of just getting in there, and then they pile all in underneath to get under the warmth of the parent, and it looks really adorable. Um, this is another one where, don't focus too much on the sound for ID purposes. It's mostly going to get your attention, and then you can visually ID the bird, but they make this kind of yap, yap, yap noise. But they are just a very beautiful bird. Again, those bubblegum pink, impossibly slender legs, and this really contrasting black and white coloration overall. This one, I had to go to some of the eBird range maps because they're a more recent newcomer to Canada. They've recently, in the last 20 or so years, started expanding, and especially even in the last 10 or so into Saskatchewan increasingly. They've just started showing up in greater numbers and successfully breeding. A lot of species, there's some innate amount of dispersal that happens, and some species disperse, naturally more than others. And, if they disperse and they find an area that might be suitable, they might come back that next year. They might, travel with other stilts, and they might establish new breeding populations. And so that appears to be what's happening for the black-necked stilt. They're still increasing their range in Saskatchewan. They're coming, definitely they have a stronghold in Alberta, but we're seeing them more and more into Saskatchewan. So that's kind of a cool, neat little change in the range distribution of this species. Okay, onto our little froggy. So we've got the northern leopard frog. This is a fairly large frog compared to the boreal chorus and wood frogs that we spoke about last week. Maybe about 11 centimeters long, so, little over 4 inches. As you're going to realize with all of these frogs, the body color changes a fair bit. And so you're more often looking at different clues to the identity as opposed to just kind of the overall body coloration of the amphibian. So in the northern leopard frog, they're going to be covered in these kind of large spots. And if you look at this inset photo here, these large darker spots, they kind of have this pale halo around the edges of it. And that is true no matter the base color of the species. A little bit harder to tell on the much darker ones, but most of the lighter colored species, it's a fairly evident, nice little halo around there. They're actually a species of special concern in the western boreal and prairie regions, and they sound a little bit like someone rubbing two balloons together, or somebody doing, like how kids do that weird throat thing. Anyway, I'll play it and maybe you'll recognize what I'm talking about here. Here's the northern leopard frog. So kind of a groaning noise. Not the most exciting sounding frog, but really kind of a slow, groany, creaky, or two balloons running together. Just seeing a quick thing in the chat. Avocets aren't avocets only salmon redheaded in the breeding season? Yes. So especially in the States, you're going to be seeing a lot of those species for the most part in their non-breeding plumage. So yes, they do acquire more of a gray head in the non-breeding season. Okay, so that is our northern leopard frog, and then we're going to quickly run through a few common wetland plants that you're likely to run into. So these wetland plants, they're all adapted to wet environments. They're tolerant to varying degrees of flooding. Some of them, really like a lot of water. Some of them prefer not so much water, and they all kind of have their little ecological niche on that kind of drier to sopping wet lake bottom amount of water. So first, the cattail. Cattails are really easy to identify, especially kind of as they start growing in the midsummer. They really look like a corn dog on a stick. Their leaves are flattened, they're bright green, and they have many leaves that come up from a base. And these things can be quite tall. If they're in, good habitat conditions, there's enough moisture for them, they can get 5 to 10 feet tall. As you can see, my friend Mike here on the bottom left-hand side, we were doing some vegetation surveys, and it took quite a fair bit to measure the height of the cattail above the water. In the off season, so especially, now in the winter and springtime, last year's flowers, that's what those corn dog looking things are. Those are the female flowers. They'll have all gone to seed. So they have all of this fluff, and there are teeny tiny little seeds in the cattail heads. And so, birds will eat the seeds, and some of them will also use this to line some of their nests. You can find them in deep or shallow water, and they can form these kind of terrifying floating mats. I've been on shelves of it's just cattails, and you have no idea how much deeper, the water is below them, and sometimes it can be many feet. I've actually been on an island that had trees on it that was a floating platform that originally started from a cattail mat that just got more and more massive. And this island in this wetland, it depended like which way the wind was blowing if you were going to be able to get around one side or the other. So they can form these incredible floating mats in some conditions, and they'll form large monoculture stands. So when you have a great big stand of cattail, oftentimes you've mostly just got cattail on there. So I'm sure folks have seen cattails before. Again, that looks like kind of a corn dog on a stick. Bulrushes are probably another name that you've heard tossed around. So they're another deep water wetland plant. They're dark green and they're round in cross section, and they actually have a spongy center. So next time you're out at a wetland, grab a piece and, snap it in half, and you'll see all of those little, you know, cells of spongy tissue in them, and they can be quite squishy. They have a single spiked stalk, so there's no other leaf associated with it. That's just that one long spiky stalk. And then they have their flowers as these kind of tassels near the tip of that little leaf, that little spear. You'll often find them, as I said, in deep waters, and they too will form big monoculture stands. And so you can see it, and I'll show a picture at the end here. You can just see like, oh, you've got the light green of the cattails over on one side, and then you've got the bulrushes, and there's like kind of a distinct line between the two. The bulrushes are taking over on one side, the cattails are taking over on the other. So you'll often find them just, in those big monoculture stands. Rushes are like teeny tiny bulrushes. They're also dark green. They're also brown in cross section. They're wiry though. They don't quite have that spongy center to them, and they really feel kind of rough and wiry. They have a single spiked stalk as well, and these ones are short. They're up to about 2 feet, and they're more of a moist soil wetland plant. So think, roadside ditches, especially if you've driven around the prairies and you've seen just kind of like a really dark green area in kind of a roadside ditch. Those are going to be rushes, though they make this like really dark green hue over whatever area that they're taking over. So moist soils, they can't handle it too wet. They also don't like it too dry. So definitely a moist soil species. And they really do look like small bulrushes. And, I've heard lots of folks refer to them as round grass. And lots of ranchers obviously don't like this because it's not terribly, I don't think cattle can eat this at all. If they do, it's probably not terribly nutritious for them. They do have really beautiful little flowers, though, if you happen to be at just the right moment and you can take a look. They have these nice kind of lily-shaped flowers. So those are the rushes. Another one you'll hear me mention are sedges, and sedges are really grass-like. And the way to remember sedges is sedges have edges. So on each of these little leaf stalks coming off a main stem, if you feel them, they're really going to be kind of like almost a W in cross section. And those ridges are quite firm and they're quite rough. They also, most of them have a triangular stem, and they don't get too terribly tall, between 1 to 3 feet in height, depending on the species you have and where they're at. So they really do, sedges have those edges on their leaves. So if you grab the leaves, they really, really are quite ridged and quite rough. They form these neat little spikelets, and those are kind of a puffy sac that contains the flower and eventually the nutlet that the plant produces. They're mostly a shallow water to wet meadow species. There's a few species that really like sedge wetlands. Yellow rails really like them. Nelson sparrows and lacons like them a little dry, but Nelson sparrow also really likes sedge wetlands. So they're one of those intermediate. They're not quite at the upland. They're not in the deeper water. They're kind of in same sort of area that you might find some of the rushes in. So remember, the sedges have edges and rushes are round. So the bulrushes and the rushes. There's also spike rushes. Those are not always round, but they can be. They look like a little spear, essentially. They have one single little leaf, and then they have this kind of flower at the very, very tip of it. They're often dark green, and they can be up to about 3 feet tall. They like kind of shallow water and wet meadow spaces as well. And they do have these cute little flowers that form right at the tip, and they do look like a tiny little spear. Some of them are triangular in circumference, some of them are more square, and some of them are slightly more rounded. Those are the spike rushes, but unlike the bulrushes, they don't have a tassel kind of hanging off at the tip. They really just do have a kind of spear-like flower. And I'll mention common reed, but we'll talk about it in a couple of weeks because most often you're going to be seeing the invasive Phragmites species. But I just wanted to bring to your attention that there is indeed a native common reed, a native Phragmites species to North America that's not invasive and that is good for the habitat. Essentially, it is a grass. It is very, very tall. They can grow up to 20 feet, and they're bright green when they're fresh. And in the off season, they turn this kind of nice uh, dusky brown color. The native species, the stems will turn reddish in the fall. The invasive species won't do that, but they have this kind of feathered top to them, and you'll find them in wetlands, in ditches. They're very salt tolerant, especially the invasive ones, and they also form large monoculture stands. All of that is great for the native one, less ideal for the invasive one, which really does outcompete and overpower a lot of species. Um, but again, we'll talk about more about the differences between the two when we cover the invasive species. But just so you know, we do actually have a native Phragmites species. This one you might also be familiar with. This is a tiny little plant that forms these great big mats on still water areas. So they're tiny little plants. They have 2 or 3 leaves and they're floating. So if you pick them up, you'll notice teeny tiny little rootlets hanging down from them. The flowers are tiny and essentially not visible to the naked eye. And, they really do form these neat little mats in still water areas. There's a couple of different species. Lemna minor is this one with the really rounded leaves, that's the one you're likely to encounter most. And there's Lemna trisulca, which has these 3 little leaves and that kind of branches out and makes more little leaves. Very cute little plants, and they're really a good nutritious food. So a lot of waterfowl, a lot of ducks, a lot of species that live in wetlands also feed on duckweeds because they're kind of prolific and good for you. And just as an example of some of these wetland plants at a distance, on the right-hand side, we're going to see lots of cattails. You can see last year's growth with some of those fluffy heads, but we're seeing the new stuff coming in. They haven't made those kind of corn dog on a stick yet, but they're kind of really tall, grassy. They're in some fairly deep water. So those are the cattails. To the left of there, we've got this much, much darker, deeper green color. You can see some of the old vegetation there, and it all looks kind of wiry. It's all this kind of single stalk bending around all over the place. And those are our bulrushes. And in the foreground here, because there's a little bit of shallower water, we have some of those sedges. They really do look like grasses, but you won't be seeing grasses in the middle of a wetland. If you see something that looks like a grass, go give it a feel, and it's most likely a nice little sedge. So that's just kind of why you might look at wetland plants, and it does really help to say, hey, over in those cattails or over in those bulrushes, or if you're like me, I just like knowing the things that are around me. So that wraps up my wetland plant spiel. We can go over the bird sounds of today and our species. We covered the northern pintail. We got the toots and the tent zipper sound. We got the American coot, which makes a variety of kind of popping, hiccuping, burry noises. Kind of sounds like a chicken inside the wetland. Redneck grebe does that kind of whinny braying call, heard over long distances. and the piebald grebe, two of its calls. First, the ow hoop one that you're most likely to hear. And the laughing hyena call. And that one doesn't usually, go on for a long length of time either. Okay, our other bird songs. Got the killdeer. So it's really convenient. Kind of says its name, killdeer, killdeer, killdeer. And trust me, you will get a lot of chance to practice this one if you have a killdeer in your midst. They are very, very vocal about announcing their presence. The American Avocet does a little bit of a pleek, pleek, pleek. And the black-necked stilt does kind of a yap, yap, yap call. And last but not least, our northern leopard frog, that big frog that kind of sounds kind of groaning, creaking, rubbing of balloons together. Almost sounds like someone messing around with a burp. I'm just thinking back, my dad used to do that. He'd get like a great big burp and just try to speak in burp, and kind of reminds me of that a little bit. And I do have a soundscape ready for you guys this evening. No joke, I finished this at 5:30 this evening. So let's listen to our soundscape. There's going to be some good piebald grebe in there. I don't have all of the red-winged blackbirds and yellow-headed blackbirds annotated in it because, as you're going to learn as you get out to wetlands and start to recognize the sounds around you, there's an awful lot of them. Okay, let's have it. Okay, so that one's almost ready to put up, and I'm going to plan to put up a few more, hopefully this coming week, then we can get more of those online. But that's all we have for this evening for the recorded portion of the evening. I'd like to say thank you all for tuning in. If you want to reach out to me at all, you can find me at llatchmoy@birdscanada.org. You can visit the MarshWatch webpage at birdscanada.org/birdscience/MarshWatch. You can find us online and on a lot of the socials. I still don't know if we have anything posted to the Blue Sky account, but we do have one. We are a not-for-profit, and if you are inclined to give to a charity, we hope you will keep us in mind in your giving portfolio. I would like to say a big thank you to the supporters who have, for the last 3 years, made this programming possible. That's the Manitoba Fish and Wildlife Enhancement Fund, the Government of Canada, Saskatchewan Ministry of Environment's Fish and Wildlife Development Fund, Sask Power, and Wildlife Habitat Canada. And thanks to you guys for tuning in, because without you, we can't run a program. So thank you very much.